I'm divorcing you, and I want you out of the house by Monday, my husband, Trevor, said as he dropped a set of thick legal papers onto his Thanksgiving dinner plate, right on top of the sliced turkey. The heavy silence of the Stonegate Estate dining room didn't last long. Instead, his mother, Diane, let out a sharp, jagged laugh that cut through the room like a blade. "Finally!" she sneered, leaning over her crystal wine glass. "You'll be homeless soon, and we can finally stop pretending you belong at this table. You were always just a placeholder, Claire." Across the long mahogany surface, Trevor's two brothers and their wives began to applaud. The sound of their clapping hands echoed against the high ceilings like a celebration of my ruin. I didn't cry. My voice tightened, but I kept my eyes fixed on the silver cornucopia centerpiece. I reached into my small, faded clutch and pulled out a matte black card. It was worn at the edges, but it pulsed with a quiet, terrifying power. I handed it to the head waiter, Marcus, who had served the Sterling family for 20 years. Marcus took the card, his eyes scanning the embossed gold lettering. His posture stiffened instantly. He looked at the name, then at me, and leaned in. "Miss, I had no idea. My deepest apologies for the delay. We will begin the transition immediately." If the people who swore to love you suddenly treat you like trash the moment they think you're poor, do they deserve to lose everything they own to the person they mocked? "What is this nonsense?" Trevor snapped, grabbing his wine. "Marcus, stop playing with her. She's broke. Her uncle was a nobody from the Midwest. Just run the joint account card so we can pay the catering staff and leave this girl to pack her trash." "I'm afraid that won't be possible, Mr. Sterling," Marcus said, his voice flat and professional. "This card does not belong to the Sterling account. It belongs to the owner of this estate, and the restaurant, and the very land this entire gated community sits on." Diane's laughter died in her throat. She looked at the card, then at me. "What are you talking about? My husband bought this place 10 years ago with his own sweat and blood." "No, Diane, your husband took a massive, interest-only loan from a private trust to buy this place. A trust that my Uncle Silas managed. He didn't just manage it, though. He owned it. And when he passed away when I was 18, he left the keys to the kingdom to me." Trevor's phone buzzed violently on the table. He looked down, and his face went from a smug red to a ghostly, sickly white. "Claire, why did I just get a notification that our joint account has a balance of 0, and why did my firm's access codes just expire?" "Because I moved it," I said, taking a slow, deliberate sip of water. "Every penny you funneled out of our savings to pay for your business trips to Vegas with your secretary. I didn't just find the divorce papers in your briefcase, Trevor. I found the receipts for the emerald necklace you bought her last month. I figured if you wanted a new life, you should start it with a clean slate and a 0 balance." Trevor stood up, his chair screeching against the floor. "It doesn't matter. Even if you have money, you can't just take my house. We're still married. This is marital property." "Actually," I said, sliding a second folder across the table, "you might want to check the signature on those divorce papers you just handed me. I didn't sign the ones you gave me. I had my lawyers draft these. They include a full infidelity and fraud clause from our prenup. You know, the one your mother forced me to sign. It turns out it protects the person with the most assets. That's me, Trevor." The firm, Miller, the oldest brother, gasped. He was staring at his own tablet. "The law firm is under a federal freeze? Claire, what did you do?" "I didn't do anything but shine a light," I said. "I bought the building your firm is housed in 6 months ago. When I looked at the books, I noticed your father was using the Vanderbilt Trust's credit line to pay off his gambling debts. I simply stopped the line of credit. The dominoes are just falling on their own now." Diane stood up, clutching her pearls so hard the string looked like it might snap. "You're a monster. We took you in. We gave you a name." "You gave me a target, Diane," I replied. "You spent 7 years telling me I wasn't good enough for the Sterling name. Tonight, I decided I agreed with you, so I'm taking the name back." along with the house, the cars, and the very chairs you're sitting on. A heavy knock sounded at the double mahogany doors. Two men in dark suits stepped in. They didn't look like guests. They held badges that caught the light of the chandelier. Trevor Sterling, we have a warrant for your arrest regarding the Vanderbilt Trust fraud and embezzlement. Trevor looked at me, his eyes wide with a pathetic kind of terror. Claire, please, you're the owner. Tell them it was a mistake. We can work this out. As the officers moved toward Trevor, he lunged across the table, not to attack me, but to grab the black card. Marcus grabbed his arm firmly. Trevor looked me dead in the eye, his voice shaking. You think you won. You don't know why Silas left you that money. He didn't love you, Claire. He was paying you off for what he did to your mother. The room went cold. I stared at the floor. My mother died when I was 6, and Uncle Silas was the only family I had left. He was a silent, stern man who lived in a library and died with a pen in his hand. What are you talking about, Trevor? I whispered. Ask your loyal waiter, Trevor sneered as the handcuffs clicked shut around his wrists. Marcus knew Silas for 30 years. Ask him why the Vanderbilt Trust was created the exact same month your mother accidentally fell off that balcony in Chicago. I turned to Marcus. The waiter wouldn't look at me. His hand, usually steady as a rock, trembled slightly as he adjusted the white cloth on his arm. Marcus? My voice was small. Is he lying? It is not my place to say, miss, Marcus whispered, but your uncle left a final letter in the safe at the estate office. He said you should only read it if the Sterling family revealed their fangs. Diane let out a cackle. See? You're no better than us. You're living on blood money. Your precious uncle murdered his own sister for the inheritance, and you're using that same money to kick us out? You're a Vanderbilt, Claire. That means you're a killer's heir. I felt the room spinning. The moral trap had flipped. If my wealth was built on my mother's life, was I any better than the vulture sitting at this table? Get them out, I told the officers, my voice cold and hollow. Get all of them out. Now. As Trevor was led away and the rest of the family was escorted to the service entrance, I followed Marcus deep into the bowels of the estate. We went past the grand kitchen, past the wine cellar, to a small, cramped office that smelled of old paper and cedar. Marcus opened the safe. He pulled out a single yellowed envelope. On the front, in Silas's sharp, angular handwriting, were the words, "To Claire for when the world shows its true colors." I opened it with shaking fingers. Inside wasn't a confession of murder. It was a series of bank transfers and a private investigator's report from 20 years ago. I looked at the documents. My breath hitched. The investigator's report wasn't about Silas. It was about Diane Sterling. Marcus, what is this? Your mother didn't fall, miss, Marcus said, his voice thick with regret. She was pushed. She had discovered that Diane's husband, Trevor's father, had been laundering money through her family's charitable foundation. She was going to go to the police. Silas couldn't prove it then, so he spent the rest of his life bankrupting them slowly, waiting for you to be old enough to finish the job. I realized then that Silas hadn't just left me money. He had left me a trap. He knew Trevor would find me. He knew the Sterlings would try to marry into the Vanderbilt wealth to save themselves. He wanted them to think they were winning, right up until the moment I pulled the rug out. I looked at the vial. There was a note attached. They used this on your mother to make her dizzy before the fall. I kept the evidence. Use it wisely. I wasn't just an heir. I was a weapon. Silas hadn't paid me off. He had recruited me. I walked back up to the dining room. Diane was still there, refusing to leave, screaming at a junior server. I walked up to her and held up the vial. Her face went from angry to pure, paralyzed horror. She knew exactly what it was. Where did you get that? She whispered. I found it in the house you're about to lose, I said, and I think the police would be very interested to know it matches the toxicology report from my mother's accident. Diane lunged for the vial, her fingers clawing at the air, but I stepped back. Marcus was there in an instant, his arm like an iron bar between us. You can't prove anything, Diane shrieked. That was decades ago. The evidence is gone. The physical evidence might be old, Diane, I said, my voice tightening, but the money trail is fresh. You see, when Silas bailed your husband out 10 years ago, he made him sign a confession. He told your husband it was just a formality for the loan. Your husband was so desperate for the sterling name to stay relevant that he signed his own wife's death warrant. Diane collapsed into the mahogany chair, the same one she had used to mock me minutes ago. He wouldn't. Arthur loved me. Arthur loved his country club membership more than anything, I said. He traded you for a 10-year extension on his lifestyle, and now that extension has expired. I pulled out my phone and hit play on a voice memo. It was a recording from the bedroom I shared with Trevor, taken only 3 nights ago. Trevor's voice. Once the divorce is final and we strip her of the trust access, we'll finally have enough to pay off the offshore accounts. Mom says it's the only way to keep the police from reopening the '96 file. The betrayal was layers deep. Trevor wasn't just divorcing me because he was bored or had a mistress. He was divorcing me to steal the Vanderbilt trust to cover up his family's old murder. They had used me as a piggy bank for 7 years, waiting for the right moment to kill me, socially or literally. You were going to do it to me, weren't you, Diane? The same thing you did to my mother. Once the papers were signed, I was going to have an accident, too. Diane didn't answer. She just stared at the table, her eyes blank. That's why Trevor was so insistent on the hiking trip next weekend, I realized aloud. My heart hammered against my ribs. I had been sleeping next to a man who was calculating the height of a cliff. Marcus, I said, call the district attorney. Tell them we have the Vanderbilt ledger and a supplemental recording regarding the 1996 cold case. Suddenly, Miller, the golden boy brother, stepped forward from the hallway. He wasn't crying like Trevor or paralyzed like Diane. He was holding a heavy silver tray. Claire, wait, Miller said, his voice smooth. If you do this, the Vanderbilt name goes down with us. The trust was used for the laundering. You'll lose the money. You'll lose the estate. You'll be just as broke as you want us to be. I looked at Miller. He was the smartest one, the one who always stayed in the shadows. I don't care about the money, Miller, I said. I spent 7 years being poor in this house while you all looked down on me. I know how to be broke. Do you? Miller smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. He set the tray down. I thought you'd say that, which is why I took the liberty of calling the Trust's board of directors 10 minutes ago. They don't care about justice, Claire. They care about stability, and they've just voted to remove you as trustee due to mental instability. I stared at Miller. You think the board will back you? You're a sterling. They know your father was a thief. They know my father was useful, Miller countered, and they know I am even more useful. You're a liability, Claire, a grieving daughter looking for revenge. That's bad for business. I felt a cold shiver. But then I looked at Marcus. Marcus wasn't worried. In fact, he was barely hiding a smile. Miller, I said, did you actually check who sits on the board of the Vanderbilt Trust, or did you just call the number on the letterhead? Miller's brow furrowed. I called the chairman, Elias's old partner. You called a ghost, I said. Silas's partner died 3 years ago. The board you spoke to is a shell company, and that shell company is owned by a single person. I pulled out my black card again and flipped it over. On the back, in tiny print, was a website login and a secondary name, the Phoenix Foundation. I am the board, Miller, I said. I've spent the last 7 years while you were out partying, secretly buying up the debt of every member of that board. I didn't just inherit the trust, I swallowed it. Miller's face finally cracked. The silver tray he was holding clattered to the floor. I turned to the family that had tried to destroy me. Trevor is going to prison for the fraud he committed this year. Diane, you are going to confess to the events of 1996 in exchange for a life sentence in a minimum security facility. If you don't, I will release the evidence and ensure you end up in the harshest state prison in the country. And what about me? Miller whispered. You, Miller, are going to work for me, I said. You're going to use all that useful talent to liquidate every sterling asset. You will sell the cars, the jewelry, and this very house. Every cent will go to the Foundation for Families of Unsolved Crimes. When you're done, you'll have nothing but your resume and the clothes on your back. Diane began to wail. Not a loud scream, but a low, broken sound. Her voice tightened as she realized her reign was over. She looked at the turkey, cold and greasy, on the table, and then at me. You really are a Vanderbilt, she whispered. No, I said, walking toward the door. I'm my mother's daughter, and Thanksgiving is finally over. I walked out into the cool November air. Marcus followed me, holding my coat. Where to, miss? He asked. To the 4th Street shelter, Marcus, I said. I think I'd like to have dinner with some people who actually know the value of a seat at the table. I didn't look back at the lights of the estate as they flickered and went dark. I was finally home.